We're coming to the end of 2020, what a year that's been, and we're maybe not getting in as many games as we'd like right now, so I thought I'd take a look and see how else you can immerse yourself into miniature gaming. Now, one of those ways I get motivated to paint a new army or play a new game is the lore of a game. For those who aren't familiar with the term lore, I mean the world building or the background that a game is set in. This can give you lots of inspiration to maybe delve into a new game, give you a cool reason to paint a specific army, or maybe it just gives you something to read or listen to. Now, we all know that the worlds of Warhammer are well documented and have a long history to read about. However, there are some other great games out there with some really rich backgrounds that often get overlooked. I'm Andy from BlackJack Legacy, and I'm here to tell you about 5 amazing miniatures games lore that aren't Warhammer. Malefall. Now, you may not realise it, but Malefall from Weird Games has been around since 2009, which gives it 11 years of amazing twisted background stories to catch up on. Malefall is set partially on an alternative Earth where magic used to exist. Now, many years ago, that magical life force began to dry up, and threatened by its decline, magicians began to look for a new source. It was at this point in 1787 that they discovered the Breach. This was a portal which opened up through a thin barrier to a whole new world. Beyond this breach was discovered the city of Malefall. This city was surprisingly similar to many of our own, but eerily devoid of any inhabitants. This new world was gradually turned into a new frontier, when crumbling mining towns surrounding the city were rebuilt into boom towns in the search and trade of something known as soul stones, the source of powerful magic which was discovered within Malefall. In 1797, the breach was destabilised, which collapsed the portal, trapping some of the people over in Malefall. Back on Earth, the Guild was formed, who made themselves self-appointed controllers of the dwindling, valuable resource of soul stones left on Earth. Then, in 1897, the breach spontaneously reopened. The Guild was ready for this and took control of the breach, fueling a new boom trade in soul stones. The continuing story is now set in 1901, and the control of the Guild is precarious to say the least. Lesser, unstable breaches have begun to appear on Earth, and a significant part of the Malefall miners and steamfitters workforce have organised themselves, and smuggling is rife. In a world of gothic horror, Victorian structures, steampunk constructs, and Wild West gunslingers, these near-lawless lands are still worth treading for some, as the soul stones deep within the cavernous catacombs are worth more than the sweat and blood it takes to obtain them. The draw of those extremely valuable soul stones has brought the powerful, the desperate, the ambitious, and the cunning to Malefall from Earth. Whilst the Guild's control of the breach ensures that it remains a dominant power within Malefall City, it is challenged on all sides by the sabotage and magical prowess of the Arcanists and the shuffling undead that serve the foul resurrectionists. The Outcasts, a loose collection of mercenaries and other ne'er-do-wells, sell their services to the highest bidder when not pursuing their own individual objectives, and the mysterious Ten Thunders crime syndicate works from the shadows to extend its influence throughout the city. Now, not every threat comes from Earth, however. The ancient Neverborn, the original inhabitants of Malefall who have resurfaced, will not easily surrender their lands to what they see as foreign invaders, and the gremlins of the Bayou have become quite powerful by learning from and mimicking the humans that seized control of Malefall City. Malefall is the first game I heavily immersed myself in, and aside from some truly stunning models, the world of Malefall is really what drew me in. This is a world that is about the characters, the stories, and the secret societies where you really should be afraid of things that go bump in the night. If you're wanting to get immersed in the world yourself, there's a few places you can start. The Malefall 3rd edition rulebook has a very in-depth background of the build-up to the first breach, and then continues with the development of the city of Malefall, the factions within this world, and why they all continue to stake their claims on a place you'd certainly not want to visit on holiday. Another great place is the Breachside broadcast. This is an official Weird Games Malefall podcast, but rather than being a market and sales pitch, it's dedicated to audio stories on the other side of the breach. These really bring alive the characters that inhabit Malefall and are a fantastic source of inspiration for choosing a faction, creating a themed board to play your games on, or even just to listen to and enjoy the fascinating world. Infinity. If you like your background with a little more sci-fi, but aren't looking for that grimdark or dystopian future, then Infinity by Corvus Belli might just be the one for you. The law of infinity is a fascinating one, as it builds from our very own world, which grounds it in a somewhat believable universe. It begins in the second half of our current century with the accidental discovery of a wormhole in space, whereupon NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Russian Cosmonautic Agency join together to explore it. They send a probe through the wormhole, which comes back with data showing a whole new planetary system. Armed with this information, the joint project decide to build a huge colony ship called the Ariadne in order to transport the first pioneers through the wormhole to the new system and to try and begin settlements. After the successful deployment of the Ariadne, a second much larger colony ship called the Aurora was planned to follow up, bringing support. However, during its travel, the wormhole collapsed, ensuring the Aurora was lost and the people aboard the Ariadne were left alone. Back on Earth, the loss of the Ariadne and the Aurora had a hugely devastating financial impact on the countries that had funded this project. They'd ploughed vast resources into this project, and the failure rocked their economies. With this, their political stabilities began to collapse, and the fall of North America as a dominant power gave way to other world powers to step up. This would come in the form of an unlikely alliance between Australia, New Zealand, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia, who would form together to try and combat the growth of huge Chinese corporations. The success of this made them able to compete on an equal footing with North America prior to its collapse. South American countries also began to rise up, and both Brazil and Chile joined this alliance, which would come to be known as Pan-Oceania. Now, Pan-Oceania became the driving force in creating an artificial intelligence known as Aleph. They felt this AI would be hugely convenient in all aspects of life, and they would gradually give it more and more responsibility until it effectively became omnipresent. Alongside this, their huge investments into the space race and investigating wormholes would lead them to be the first power to reach the stars and begin colonizing other planets. Now, Pan-Oceania didn't have it all their own way. Yuqing were also a force of power. The Chinese had seen an invasion in a different way, the invasion of Western culture and consumerism into their typically traditional countryside, which meant once very poor farmers were beginning to become wealthy. This meant they saw no other option than for China to reinvent itself to protect its traditional values. Religions became law, and expansion over neighbouring countries like Vietnam, Mongolia, Thailand, North Korea and Burma, to name but a few, increased China's power. The fall of the USA as a power unstabilised other countries which had invested into them, so places like South Korea and Japan could not stand this economical loss. Therefore, they invested their futures into China. Now, the proud Japanese people did not like this idea of becoming part of China, and to quell any uprising, the name Yuqing, meaning Jade Palace, was adopted for this new nation. Also during this time over in the Middle East, we see the rise of Haqqislam, which literally means New Islam. This is a move away from its old beliefs and focuses more on humanism and a search for philosophical knowledge. They are seekers of peace, and over time the Middle East becomes partially united under the Haqqislam philosophy. They aren't a nation like the superpowers of Pano and Yuqing, but they are a collection of countries who share a belief system. Backed by incredibly wealthy donors, the Haqqislam look to the stars to find a place they can call their own, and with this, they become their own nation. At this point, we are about 170 years into the future, and we have a number of nations who've reached the stars, each with their own laws and beliefs, and with no official governance. It's here that the O12 are born. Think of them like the United Nations, but with way more power. They establish lawful trade and keep the peace. Well, in theory. At this point, we discover that the original colony ship, the Ariadne, had survived, and it's established a home planet on Dawn. This then becomes a hot point of contention, as Dawn is a planet rich in materials, and the USA, along with its European and Russian partners, claim that as they send out the original colony ship, they have the ownership of this planet. Then of course the superpowers who bought up the debts of these countries believe that they now own this planet and its riches through debts owed. And unsurprisingly, the Ariadnans, who've lived here for quite some time now, see it more that they were left to die, considered lost, and that the planet is in fact theirs. O12 step in and declare that Dawn is the home planet of Ariadne, and that they are the owners of these highly sought after resources. The people of Ariadne have had over 100 years of living on this planet and have gone through some changes. Let's just say there's werewolves on this planet now, and I'll leave it for you to look into. However, their knowledge and weapons have not kept up with advances back on Earth. They do, though, have the resources that everyone wants. I could go on forever with this background and about the rise of Aleph, the AI, the Nomad Nation, these are the people who reject the rise of Aleph's power, for example, and so much more. But suffice to say, the background is rich, full of political dealings and aggressive power struggles. There are lots of places to find out more about this background, but one of the best places to start is with the brand new N4 Infinity Corebook. This is sold alongside the rulebook and has all of the background for the different factions in a beautiful full colour sourcebook. There's also a couple of graphic novels now too, called Outrage and Betrayal, and Corvus Belli have just announced some upcoming novels in partnership with Winged Hussar Publishing, so there's plenty to feast your eyes upon in one of the most underrated miniature gaming worlds out there. The Drowned Earth. The Drowned Earth by Olmec Games is one that may be less familiar to some, but if I tell you that there's dinosaurs in it, along with elephants with machine guns, I'm sure you want to know more. Well, here I am to open you up to a whole new world. Folk stories tell of boiling black skies raining down fire, while powerful seas rose up to break the land asunder. Tales are told of the floods and the devastation, the death and destruction on an unimaginable scale. The earthquakes, the choking winds, and an entire world dying, wreathed in flames. The result of this catastrophic event was that a world-spanning civilization, who were on the cusp of reaching the stars, were crushed by an almighty cataclysm, the likes of which has never been seen before or since. Known as the Fall, nobody truly knows what or why it happened. Some say it was the retribution of the gods punishing the arrogance of the builders, the people of the pre-fall civilization. Others say it was a terrible war to end all wars. Whatever it was that destroyed that civilization hundreds of years ago, all agree that the once mighty civilization that ruled the drowned earth was utterly crushed, and no matter the size of the devastation, the evidence of this lost civilization still surrounds us today. Waters have risen and nature has reclaimed the earth, healing the scars of the fall, but the once majestic towers of the cities still stood the jungles and wetlands of the drowned earth with reminders of that lost civilization. Hiding in the ground are the often mysterious trappings of the builders, both strange and unknowable creations. The twisted and broken remnants of their ingenuity lie crumbling in the dew-covered forests and the high mountains, ready to be discovered and sometimes even reclaimed. The drowned earth is a world of tropical heat, of rainforests, lagoons, brackish swamps, and island archipelago. Even the inner highlands are drenched with the monsoon rains and mountain rivers. Now, whilst these jungles and swamps are dangerous places to travel, ruined buildings and ancient artifacts are not the only things the builders left behind. Only the strongest and most tenacious wildlife emerged from the years of near extinction which followed the fall. Often the strongest were the species created in laboratories of the builders. Huge predatory reptiles stalk the forests, and terrifying calls tear through the peaceful respite of the night, reminding anyone who hears them what lurks beyond the safety of their settlement. The third part of the pre-fall legacy is the people themselves. Living amongst the descendants of the builders, often in vibrant, mixed communities, are other intelligent, non-human life forms created by the scientists of the pre-fall civilization. The true origins of these species is a secret which is known to only a select few, but for the most part, people are more concerned with the necessities of their daily lives rather than the origins of their non-human companions. Now, after hundreds of years of mere survival in an unbelievably harsh environment, something approaching civilization is beginning to emerge. People have, for the most part, settled and begun to grow crops, and in some places, large cities are emerging. Scientific discoveries are being made, or remade, and trade and commerce have become common as people search for the materials to improve their lives and ensure their safety. But where some seek to progress through their own endeavours, others wish only to take what others have through sheer force. In the south, great empires vie for dominance. The trading leagues of the northern islands fight each other for trade routes, while pirates eagerly snap up the scraps that are left behind. The fires of progress are fueled by the discovery of ancient relics, treasures of the past which contain the secrets of the builders' power. Bands of brave adventurers, thieves, bounty hunters and explorers roam the wilds in search of artifacts of power or knowledge, be they powerful weapons, rare archives, advanced tools, or exotic thinking machines. To look at the relics and ruins of the past, it is hard to comprehend how such a powerful civilization could ever have been destroyed. Now, looking to the future, the challenge is set. Progress is inevitable, but who will control it? Ordinary people, or those who wish to subvert the freedoms of others? This dystopian future alternative Earth brings with it a whole different setting to anything else out there in miniature gaming, and also gives the option to make some truly colourful tables to play your games upon. The best place to pick up this narrative is by picking up the Drowned Earth rulebook, but there is also some additional fiction on the Drowned Earth website, and it's also been expanded with the addition of a new game which recently funded on Kickstarter called the Elia Chronicles, so watch out for that coming very soon. Kings of War. Kings of War by Mantic Games has been around for about 10 years now. However, it's only really been in the latest 3rd edition of the game that we've seen the lore and background of the game begin to be fully rounded out, so for many people you may not know just how rich this world of Panathor is. Before the time of the noble races, the world was created by the old gods, known as the primogenitors. These gods were fashioned from the very things of which existence is composed: life, death, darkness, light, earth, water, and air. These 7 gods between them created the earth as we know it, and no one can truly say how long the reign of these primogenitors lasted before Bannock, the god of life, created the elves, which was the beginning of their end. Though the elves are thought to be the most ancient of the noble races, the dwarves have the strongest impression of their creation. They believe that they were created from the tears of Dianec, goddess of the underworld. These tears gathered to form a stalagmite in the form of a dwarf, and the first of the kind was created. It was because of the elves that Dianec was stricken with this grief in the first place. Bannock, the bringer of life, had grown tired of his creations, the fish, the birds and the animals, being taken away from him by Shobik, the keeper of time. He therefore wished for a creation that could surprise him, one which could leave its own mark on the world, so he created the elves. Fearful of Shobik stealing time away from his new creations, he hid them away for many, many years beneath the World Tree. Of course, he could not hide them forever, and when they were discovered by the other gods, there was much disagreement. In order to stop this quarrelling, Bannock agreed to hastily create another race, which Shobik would be able to control with his Ravagers of Time, and so the creation of man began. Dianec, meanwhile, had remained silent in the underworld, untouched by the giving of life, the joy of light, and neither dark, wind, or water made any difference to her subterranean realm. Seeing these elves and knowing she would never have children of her own, she began to cry. Seeing this sorrow, her fellow gods bestowed life upon these tears, giving birth to the dwarfs and giving them their sturdy vigour and longevity. Ironically, it was the rise of man which would be the undoing of the gods, as their awareness of their own mortality gave them drive to test the boundaries, to escape the clutches of death and live as gods themselves. By the time Bannock and Shobik had realised their mistake, it was too late. They had set in motion events which would be their downfall. Each race had been created with magic in them, but the gods never realised that one day they may learn how to harness it themselves. The elves, being the more advanced race, discovered this magic for themselves first. Early human mages were taught by the elves, and the two noble races became ever more entwined. Though they lacked the lifespan of the elves and dwarfs, they made up for this with their discipline and focus, driven by fear of their mortal frames. The elves came to admire this spirit, and it was from here that the first love affair between an elven mage and his human protege came about. It was also, however, the birth of necromancy. The knowledge that magic could halt or even reverse the Ravagers of Time was known by the elves, but they had no need to use it. They had no concept of loss, as they were near immortal creatures, but not so the humans. We enter the time of light, where a race known as the Celestians appear on Panathor. Little is known of their origins. Some say they come from a distant star, some say they came from a mirror dimension, with others believing they came from the future, due to the elves' childlike meddling in powers they did not understand. However, their impact was clear. The Celestians were an advanced race, only too eager to share knowledge and wisdom with the elves, and the reliance on the old gods all but faded. The Celestians were not content to only share a limited realm with the elves, and so began to turn their attentions to the first humans and then the dwarves. This was a time where each of the noble races, very briefly, put aside their differences and united in peace and prosperity, achieving more than at any time before or since. I could go on for hours talking about the shattering of the Fenulian mirror, the destruction of the Celestians, the God War, and of Oxan, father of lies, bringing forth the demons, soon to be known as the Abyssal Hordes. But I want you to discover the background for yourself. I haven't even touched on the rise of the undead, the trident realms of Neritica, or the orcs, goblins, or ogres, to name but only a few of the races battling it out in Kings of War. This background that Mantic has created is far, far deeper than people realise, and with its expansion through Kings of War Vanguard, Kings of War Armada, and also through the upcoming Kings of War RPG, there is so much here to feast upon. The Kings of War 3rd edition rulebook is the best place to get started, and it is a glorious tome with more than 130 pages of background, bringing the world to life. Add to this the novels that have also been published by Winged Hussar, and you have a fantasy world beginning to grow which will satisfy even the most hardened Tolkien fans. Wild West Exodus. Wild West Exodus by Warcradle Studios is another game which many will have heard of but may not know just how rich the background to this game is. An alien entity known as the Hex travels between planets where it tries to latch onto a host being to ensure its own survival. It's been doing this since time began. Chasing it down from planet to planet and trying to stop it is another alien race known as the Order. The Hex has moved around 17 times over the ages trying to ensure its survival, and each time the Order has found them and they've had to escape. This next time the Hex comes to Earth, and upon entering the Earth's atmosphere, it splits itself off into 6 different shards which scatter across the world. These shards bury themselves down into the ground and begin to telepathically communicate to the disenfranchised, the misfits and the loners of society to try and latch onto a human host. Some of the locals who are living near where these shards have buried begin to become influenced by the Hex, and it's here we see alien influences beginning to spread into humanity. The Order have followed the Hex to Earth and are looking for it, all the while a third alien race known as the Watchers are secretly keeping an eye on what is happening. They've been carefully watching the universe over time, shaping things to work how they'd like them to by influencing the actions of planets. It's at this point we see the timeline begin in our game. It's the early 1800s, and one of these Hex shards gets discovered by humanity in Romania, not fully understanding what it is, but knowing that it's the source of great power. It's stolen and transported to the American West, and here we see the scientists of the time begin to move technology faster than should have ever happened, and faster than we're ready for. It's a time and a place where people are grabbing land to carve out a future for themselves in lawless lands where they can do whatever they like, but all with this unmatched new power. By the middle of the 1800s, we enter a scientific renaissance, and this alien technology begins to transform our world with powerful weapons, transportation, and human augmentation. This is a time at the end of the American Civil War, which is defined by characters and cultures. You have the warrior nation born of the Native Americans, who now with alien technology can again access their spirit animals and shapeshift with powerful leaders such as Raging Bear and Ghost Wolf. The outlaws of the Wild West have ever increasingly powerful experimental weapons and biomechanical implants. Each of them are trying to stake their claim. Legendary outlaws such as Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Pancho Villa are all driven by the promise of fame and fortune. The Union, which is tarnished by its recent civil war and the horrific technologies it used to claim victory, is a dark reflection of its former self. With a combination of great leaders such as Abraham Lincoln and Armstrong Custer, we also have the scientific mind of Nikola Tesla, and they vow to have strength and resolution to stand tall in the face of adversity, no matter the cost. The enlightened wield formidable intellect to wipe aside those who stand in the way of science and progress. Characters such as Burson Carpathian and Thomas Edison covet knowledge above all things and believe it is only they who can steer humanity on the path to enlightenment. Trying to keep control of this are the lawmen, with leaders such as Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok, who, during the time of such violence and upheaval, are trying to defend ordinary people who have little chance to survive, let alone prosper. Mix in our alien races and you have a rich melting pot of Wild West gunslingers with augmented arms, scientific fusions of man and machine, animal spirits and alien technology. This is no normal cowboys and Indians story. The Wild West Exodus website is a fantastic source for background summaries, but you'll find a much more in-depth narrative in the core rulebook, which amazingly is free to download from their site. If you like this, there's a host of Wild West Exodus novels too, so check them out in the links below. Thanks for watching my video. I hope that you really enjoyed it. And if you did, why not consider clicking on the suggested video below to see more of the work that I've done. If you'd like to support the long-term sustainability of this channel, why not consider checking out my Patreon, where you can pledge and support from as little as $2 a month, and there is lots of different tiers and bonuses which will give you access to a private Discord server. It will give you free t-shirts, free mugs, a podcast every month, and a number of other things, including getting your name at the end of every video, like these awesome folks who already support me now.